Hey, folks. Welcome to Grace Gospel Fellowship. See, coming from Elgin, Illinois. We had a big snow day here for those of you out of town or catching us later. And so we canceled live in-person church. And through the magic of the technology, I'm going to record this message from here and put it on Facebook. So I'm going to pick up from, oh, by the way, today is it's the last day of November 2025. And last week we were talking about the gods of the nations and how that came about. Regardless of Heiser's perspective on that they were relegated to the sons of God to be their gods. Remember, Israel was well, all of the people, this was before there was an Israel, and all the people were being horrible. Remember the message last week was, why is everything so horrible? That's because people were being so horrible. And the Babel event, that's when God confused their languages to create all these other nations, and they were being horrible because they were rejecting God. And so he, in his holiness, assigned or relegated them to have their own way, as well as the rebellious sons of God. It's like, I'm full of it up to here with you guys. Do what you want to do. He turned them over to their lusts, as Paul would say. It turned them over to their sins, and it all went downhill from there. So the other gods who were originally, righteous, but they fell into line with the adversary. And many of them received, as they began to receive worship from these other nations, which is what people do if they don't have the real God intervening in their lives, they're going to, by default, with their sin nature, they're going to pursue the gods that of their choosing, the ones that they like, and they will worship those other gods. So, but regardless of how you get there, there's no question that the ancient people, the people of the ancient Near East, believed the gods of the nations were real. And I'm not saying that we should not believe that they're real. I'm saying why we should believe that they're real, not just because they did, but because of the damage that those gods did and continue to do. Because we can see the debauchery that's all around us in the world. We can see the grotesqueness of mankind at his worst. You don't have to look too far. So whatever you think, or wherever you think that those gods came from, the gods of the nations, which I'm referring to as any nation other than Israel. Israel was the chosen God. They were the elect of God to be the light to the world, to be the blessing to the nations of the world, to show the other nations that were under these, worshiping the idols, under these other gods, to show them what life can be like, the blessing of living in harmony with the Yahweh, the Creator God. Now, in scripturally, one of the biggest helps to understand God's position that these gods were real is in Psalm 82, where he judges them. He's critical of them for their not ministering justice and righteousness on the earth. So this also takes us to the this idea of an ancient Near Eastern mindset. I got that from Heiser, where he says, when you read the Bible, you want to have an ancient Israelite headset in your mind. So how do they look at things? And I tell you how that kind of dawned on me is how important that is. And I'm going to use an example. I almost wanted to title this message, The Beatles and the Bible, wink, wink, because I'm of the Beatles generation. I have a lot of friends who we laid eyes on each other and were friends before we ever heard Love Me Do or Please Please Me or She Loves You or I Want to Hold Your Hand. Those songs began in like 1963 is when they became really popular for us. So I have friends that go back that far, and when we experienced the Beatles, we experienced it in real time. one single after another, 145 after another, one album after another, one TV appearance, one Ed Sullivan show after the other, one press interview, one movie like Hard Day's Night and Help, etc. So we were spoon fed the Beatles. In my case, starting in what I guess pretty much '63 is really when Ringo joined them. Then, and we had 7 years basically of from eighth grade or seventh grade all the way through high school for me. So that is, well, just and shortly thereafter. But 7 years of incrementally experiencing the Beatles, those are very formative years. You're trying to get your bearings on life at that age. You're a young teenager, and the Beatles were very influential on the world and on our generation. The baby boomer generation was peaking then, the largest generation, and so we had that great influence of the Beatles. Well, we have a different understanding of the Beatles than somebody now who's 30 years old, didn't grow up with the Beatles. They can go download all the Beatles stuff and go through the whole catalog of the Beatles stuff in a day. They're going to have a whole different handle on it. We had those marinating in us for months at a time, weeks and weeks and months at a time. From album to album, we inhaled the music. We inhaled everything, every image on the album covers, every word that was written about it, and it united our generation. Even the parents liked the Beatles. So what I'm getting at is that if you compare what was written about the Beatles back then, I'll use an example here. In where is it? 1964. There was maybe one or two books about the Beatles. They were famous, but nobody knew how long it was going to last. Were they a flash in the pan? Who knew? We were just, wow, these guys are great. By 1968, you had Hunter Davies did their authorized biography, fully in cooperation with the band. In the 70s and the 80s, you had several unofficial histories, memoirs, analyses. An interest in the band grew after their breakup. It's hard to get a total list of that, but in '83, you had Peter Brown's book, "The Love You Make," came out. But they were gaining fame in the '80s and '90s, and there was many more books that were written about them. There was a rise in discography style books, academic studies, session logs about their recording sessions. They had broken up, and people are still can't get enough of the Beatles. In 2000, there was their first anthology, the band's own produced a multimedia project. 2000 through 2010, as there was continued surge of biographies, cultural studies, photo books, song analysis, scholarly works, retrospectives. And by the early 2010s, the bibliographies list thousands of items. Why is that important? Well, when it comes to the Bible, we had there was a similar trajectory where there was a small group that started it, and it grew and grew and grew and grew over what we for the church. I'm saying not just the Bible, but the church specifically, and the amount of publishing that was going on then. There's so much more information now than there was when it was happening, is my point. There's so much more we know about the Beatles than I ever did when the Beatles were performing and recording, simply because there's been time to ponder it and think about it, collect it, gather it, interview, publish it. There's people writing very successful, really good books about the Beatles who weren't even born when the Beatles were recording. So what's my point? There's something about the source material, about getting back, the Beatles songs, is "Get Back to Where You Once Belonged." Compare it to You know me, I'm a foodie. I'm a vegetarian and a natural foods guy, and I started Moss Hill back in the 70s. Uh, People ask me what, for advice about what to eat, diet advice or whatever. And I said it's simple. Eat your food in as close to the form that it occurs in nature as possible, the way God provided it to you. The more you remove it from the tree, from the ground, from the whatever, you're beginning to first of all, it's beginning to oxidize, it's beginning to depreciate. You need to, cook it or mix it or spice it or season it or preserve it or something, and then you're mixing a lot of sugar in it because it doesn't taste so good. You're mixing a lot of salt in it because it doesn't taste so good, or whatever, and you end up with supermarkets filled with crap. Excuse me, filled with adulterated, packaged, canned, boxed, frozen, whatever stuff that passes for food today. So, anyways, I'm not telling anybody what to eat. I'm just saying it's a better choice to eat your food as close to the way that it occurred in nature, because each incremental step away from it the way it was, it's getting cooked, processed, mixed up with something, smashed up, mixed up, flavored, whatever. It doesn't resemble the way it occurred in nature. That's just me. But it's similar to the source material, like with the Beatles. Um, there's people, you could read books about the Beatles all day long, and you'd never get to know them like you would by listening to their music, let's say. There's a phenomenon on YouTube of people, young people, who weren't alive when the Beatles were recording. They're just discovering them for the first time. They didn't grow up in a musical household, or they, for whatever reason, they missed the train, weren't that aware of the Beatles' music. Everybody knows that the Beatles existed, but not necessarily do they know their songs. And so there's young people who weren't alive when the Beatles were recording. They're listening to Beatles for the first time on the earphones with the camera on YouTube, and they're reacting to the music. And there's people who are hard rock people, there's people who are rappers, there are people who are classical musicians, there's all different ages from all around the world discovering the Beatles for the first time, like we did. Of course, they can, like I said, binge watch them and catch them, all right away. But you should see the expressions on their faces. They're amazed. They'll listen to "She's Leaving Home" and you see the tears just streaming down their faces. They're getting the Beatles' baptism, so to speak. They're getting back to the origin. Well, you can do the same thing if you put that template on the Bible, which is the main thing. I'm using that as an example, as a metaphor. Before the year 1450, there were handwritten manuscripts, which means there were very few. Even though they were produced, there weren't copies because it was a laborious process. So maybe 500 that we're aware of may exist. In in 1454, Gutenberg invents the printing press and prints the Bible. So that was between 1450 and 1499. There was maybe 200 Bible-related books at that point because we had the printing press now. Now, in 1500 to about 1600, you had about 1,000 books total. That was during the Reformation. You had Luther, Calvin, Tyndale. In the 1700s, from 1600 to 1700, you have about 3,000 books published about the Bible. That we had the rise of the Protestant and the Catholic scholarships. In the 1800s, from 1700 to 1800, there's about 6,000 books. You have the Enlightenment, you have biblical criticism begins, and you had sermon literature. And then in the 19th century, from 1800 to 1899, there's about 15,000. That's when you have global missions, you have an explosion of commentaries, and you have revivals. Then from the first half of the 20th century, there was about 40,000 new Bible-related books. These were academic, archaeological, and denominational. But from 1950 to 1980, that's my time, that's your time, a lot of you, there were 80,000 books. These are modern evangelical movement books. They're mass-marketed Christian books are out there. Now, from 1980 to 2000, there's 150,000 new books. These are study Bibles, theological series, apologetics, global publishing. From 2000 to 2010, there's 200,000 books. digital publishing, mega church authors, Bible software. From 2010 to 2020, there's 250,000 new books. These are self-publishing books, ebooks, international translations. From 2020 to last year, so 120,000 more books just in 4 years. These are we have AI tools, you have online study content, you have YouTube sermons and books. So the estimated total books were written about the Bible is very likely more than 800,000 unique works, probably crossing 1 million when you include all the different languages. Well, can you see? What would you rather have? The originals or what somebody else said if somebody else said? Because it's a telephone game. You imagine this, of the number of people who heard Jesus preach after he was resurrected, we know there was upwards of 500 people. Wouldn't you like to have a little talk with them? But that's where we get Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's where we get James and Peter and the Apostle Paul. Eyewitnesses, first-hand witnesses of what happened there. The more that you take it away from its original place, the mindset of the people who are experiencing it, they saw the miracles. They were healed. They were raised from the dead. You want to hear what that person has to say. So I'm just throwing down for how the value of reading the scriptures for yourself, because that's the closest we're going to be able to get, unless you can learn the Aramaic, the Greek, and the Hebrew, those early languages, which I envy people who do, because there are obviously people who they can just sit down and read in the Hebrew. But so anyways, back to this thing before I move forward to my main point is regarding these other gods. This is what some of these things were, some of these movements and stuff. We see heresies that comes up have to be dealt with. You have fads and trends and things that show up later in these study Bibles and stuff. You have out and out translation, by the translators adding their own thing. Like I said, the thing about this line in the sand where they were going to stone the woman caught in adultery, and Jesus says that he was without sin. Let him cast the first stone. That just showed up like 250 years later. It was not in any of the early manuscripts. So you want to be careful of these things. But this is one of the reasons why you want to be very familiar with as familiar as you can with the originals, because you have, remember, there's the dynamic tension between the two kingdoms. The light comes into the darkness. Darkness not too happy about that. So we're in that darkness out. We're being the light there. We're having a constant, it's like swimming in acid. It's constantly eating away at you with all of the opposition, the Antichrist spirit. But the Antichrist spirit has evolved and grown into all of those gods of those nations. If you think about, now I don't know what the 70 nations were in the Table of Nations back then, or 73, depending upon whether you're reading the Dead Sea Scrolls translation or the Masoretic texts. But today we still, or even maybe even more so, it's more evident to a believer, to somebody who knows the scriptures, that there are spiritual influences from the dark side all around us, affecting all of society, all of our economy, all of our social interactions, all of the technology and stuff. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. And the bad stuff isn't just not God. It's God. It's absent God plus the dark side, plus principalities and powers, plus the gods of the nations. Let me just read something about the influence that the gods of the nations have had on the world, especially the world of the Bible. And then you can just move it forward and see how it's affecting us today in our modern society. The primary influence was a persistent source of temptation for syncretism. Syncretism, that is the blending of religious practices. Remember, God says He should have no false gods before Him, because what you're doing is you're bringing in leaven. It's perverting the truth. You're bringing in, oh, God didn't mean you would die. You're bringing in questions and doubt and distractions and people. Oh, look at that shiny thing over there, and that catches your attention, and all of a sudden you're under the influence of some other spirit, and it'll take you away from God. But syncretism is a big deal. That's why God always warned about idolatry. Why would God, if these gods are not real, why is God always warning them not to worship these idols? It's because there's a spirit behind it. The influence was deeply intertwined with the social, political, and economic aspects of the daily life of the ancient Near East, leading to constant warnings and condemnation from the prophets. The most significant influence was the adoption of foreign religious practices. The Israelites frequently struggled with combining the worship of Yahweh with that of Canaanite deities like Baal, he's the storm and fertility god, and Ashtoreth, the fertility goddess. The Bible often uses the metaphor of spiritual adultery to describe this blending of faiths. Idolatry was integrated into daily life in the neighboring cultures, often associated with agricultural success, fertility rites, and military victories. For an agrarian society like ancient Israel, the appeal of Canaanite gods who were believed to control rain and crops like Baal, that was a persistent draw, leading to a one god for a crisis, another god for everyday life. That sort of mentality among Israelites. They weren't so bright about it. Cultural exchange is evident in material culture, archaeological discoveries like the Nimrud ivories and borrowed styles and motifs from Phoenicia and Syria and the Assyrian courts. There's linguistic parallels, shared linguistic and conceptual elements between the Israelite and other ancient Near Eastern religions. For example, the Hebrew word El, is a generic term for God, as in Elohim is the God, the God with the unique qualities of Yahweh, the creator God, but Elohim is also spirit beings. So it's a generic term for God, little g, and the proper name for the highest Canaanite god, El. Texts from Ugarit, an ancient Canaanite city, provide context for the cultural environment, revealing parallels in social and religious institutions and certain religious ideas, though the biblical text asserts a unique divine revelation, unique to our God, the God of the Bible, uniquely divinely inspired. Also, the Bible portrays the influence of foreign gods as a negative force, a direct challenge to the exclusive covenantal relationship between Israel and Yahweh. Well, there's problems that come from that. The law given to Moses includes specific instructions that set Israel apart from the nations. Come out from them, you're separate, be different, you're mine, you're my people. They had dietary laws. They were commanded not to intermarry with other nations or learn their detestable ways, to avoid serving other gods. It's contagious, it's insidious, it's subtle and evil how it will worm into your head, worshiping these other gods. Prophets like Elijah, in his confrontation with the prophets of Baal and Hosea, consistently condemned syncretism and idolatry, calling the people back to exclusive devotion to God. The historical books, particularly Judges and Kings, present the Israelites' repeated lapses into idolatry as a cycle leading to divine judgment, spiritual decline, and oppression by their enemies. The cultural influence of the gods of the nations was a constant challenging backdrop to ancient Israelite life and faith, shaping much of the biblical narrative as a call for a unique and undivided allegiance to Yahweh in a polytheistic world. It is a polytheistic world. We worship the one true God through Christ. It's the monotheistic with only one true real God. The other ones are not real. They're lesser. And if they're lesser and they're not in allegiance to God, then they're evil and they're dark. And that's what we've got going. The pagan Gentile or the ethnos is that word translated Gentile. If you were not believing in Yahweh, you're believing in another God by default. Let me just repeat that. I wrote this morning. If you're not believing in Yahweh, you're believing in another God by default. A lesser God, a false God. You're either one side or the other. You're not, oh no, I don't believe. Well, guess where that unbelief came from? If you don't factor in the reality of existence of these other gods, you risk being unwittingly deceived by them, blinded even to their very existence. What was it that Baudelaire, I forget how you say it, the French guy. Baudelaire. He referred to the devil. These are two English translations of his French words. The devil's cleverest wile is to make men believe that he does not exist. Or the prettiest trick of the devil is to make us believe that he doesn't exist. So if you don't factor in the reality of his existence, these other gods, you risk being unwittingly deceived by them, blinded even to their very existence. Think about the gods of the nations and what we know of those cultures. They all require something from you, a gift, a sacrifice, some kind of allegiance, some sort of rituals. Even the hedonistic ones, they'll get their pound of flesh out of you. The influence of the pagan gods of the nations, the influence that they have on this world has been normalized. We're the weirdos. They're normal. You read that? Okay. Now I want to read you something else that will tie into this. And I got a lot of this from our friend Michael Heiser. And I'm going to read you about the Elijah and the widow of Zarephath and the Naaman when he was healed of leprosy. They're short. I'm going to read this from 1 Kings. We're going to read about the widow. This is 1 Kings 17, 8 through 24. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Arise, get thee to Zarephath. So Zarephath is a place which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there, to sustain thee. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the woman was there gathering sticks. And he called her, and he said, Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel, that I may drink. And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her, and he said, Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. Well, a prelude to this story is there was a bad drought and famine in the land. So he asked her for some a little water and a little bread. And she said, As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but a handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I'm gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said unto her, Fear not. Go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me. And after make for thee and for thy son. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, The barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail, until the day that the Lord sendeth rain upon the earth. And she went and did according to the saying of Elijah. And she and he and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not. neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Elijah. And it came to pass after these things that the son of the woman, remember, he'd been there many days, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, fell sick, and his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. And she said unto Elijah, What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? And he said unto her, Give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom and carried him up into a loft where he abode. And he laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn by slaying her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times. And he cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come unto him again. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came unto him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down out of the chamber into the house and delivered him unto his mother. And Elijah said, See, thy son liveth. And the woman said to Elijah, Now by this I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in thy mouth is truth. Now, 2 Kings 5, 1 through 19. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, important military guy. He was a great man and his master, with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. And he was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid. And she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God, my Lord, were with the prophet. I got off to a bad start on that sentence. Would God, my Lord, were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. She's praying if he would be with the prophet, that he would recover from the leprosy. And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Well, go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed, and he took with him 10 talents of silver, and 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment, of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes, tore his clothes in mourning, or in grief, he was upset. So the king of Israel reads this letter, gets upset, tears his clothes, and he says, Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man doth send me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elijah, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot, and he stood at the door of the house of Elijah. And Elijah sent a messenger unto him. saying, Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and he went away. And he said, Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand or wave his hand over the place and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the rivers or the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and he went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee to do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then when he says to thee, Wash and be clean? Then he went down and he dipped himself 7 times into the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again unto the flesh of a little boy, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, now I know there's no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now, therefore, I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant? In other words, do this for me. Give to me, your servant, 2 mules burden of earth. For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. That was part of his job as sidekick to the king of Syria. He would accompany him into the temple to worship the idol Rimmon and worship him. So he says, give me some 2 mule loads. That's a lot of dirt. Because what he wanted to do is when he went back into that temple, he'd lay that dirt out there. And he would worship the idol there, knowing full well that the idol was not the true God. So anyways, give me 2 mules of earth, for thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. This guy's a believer now. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said, the prophet says, Shalom, go in peace. So he departed from him. Well, now let's unpack this. Listen to what Jesus says. Now remember when Jesus goes back to Galilee, he says there went out the fame about him. And he taught in their synagogues. This is Luke chapter 4. He taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. And he came to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he stood up to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. When he opened the book, he found the place where it was written, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister, and sat down. And the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say unto them, This day this scripture is fulfilled in your ears. And all bare him witness. And they wondered at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, Is not this Joseph's son? And he said unto them, You will surely say unto me this proverb, Physician, heal thyself. Now, that was a saying. It was an old saying, a proverb. They were essentially saying, you have the power to heal others, so prove it by healing yourself and us, your hometown neighbors. That proverb highlights their lack of faith. This is the way Jesus was using it. He says, whatsoever we have heard done in Capernaum, so also do here in thy country. Well, Capernaum, that's where he did all these miracles. I want to see if I have a list or even time to go over them, because that was where most of his big miracles were done. So they heard about it, of course, and they wanted to see some. But Jesus says, verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. He's in his hometown. But I tell you of a truth, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elisha, and when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine was throughout the land. But unto none of them was Elisha sent, save unto Sarepta, a city of Sidon, unto a woman that was a widow. So there was a lot of widows there. But there was one woman from the city of Sidon. She was a widow. The prophet was sent there. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elijah, the prophet. And none of them was cleansed, saving Naaman the Syrian. And all they of the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath. That really got them. They rose up, and they thrust him out of the city, and they led him up to the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, that they might cast him down headlong. But he, passing through the midst of them, went his way, and he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and taught them on the Sabbath days. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. Why were they so mad at him for saying, well, but there's one widow and there's one leper. There was many widows, many lepers, but there was one. Why did it piss them off so much? Well, they know that those two people, they have something in common. They have faith. And by using them as examples, Jesus is saying, you people are pathetic. I'm shocked at your unbelief. They get angry. Well, that's all well and good, but that even misses something. This is what I got from Heiser this week. It's beautiful. What do the widow of Zarephath and Naaman the leper have in common? They're pagans. They're Gentiles. Naaman lives in Syria. The widow of Zarephath is in Gentile territory. Well, so Jesus picks two people hopelessly cut off from any of the things that the Jews around them would think that assist them in their salvation. First, these people, they're not of the elect ones called by God, the Israelites. They're not of the elect. They have no temple. They don't have a Bible. Naaman is never going to show up at a temple. He's never going to read his Bible. He's never going to look at a psalm and think, oh, this is probably the kind of prayer that Yahweh likes. I think I'll pray that. Didn't happen. He's never going to observe a festival. He's never going to observe one of the feast days, one of the rituals, never going to be connected to the sacred calendar of Israel. Oh, and by the way, he's not getting circumcised either. In other words, he brings nothing to the table. He's totally empty-handed. He goes to Elisha, and here's his theology. I'm clean now. It's awesome. Now I know that Yahweh is the true God, and from this point on, whenever I offer my own little sacrifice, it's going to be to Yahweh. And that's why he asks for some dirt to take back with him. Then he has this question, this nagging doubt. He says, I got to be honest with the prophet. Part of my job is to go into that temple of this God who I no longer believe in. I just want to know that when I go in there with the king and we do our little thing over there to Rimmon that we're supposed to do, how does Yahweh feel about that? Will Yahweh look differently at his faith if he misses up something theologically? Does Yahweh know his heart or not? I mean, I thought that was really what we're talking about here. Does Yahweh know that I know he is God, the real God? Does he know? Does he know that I believe? So what does he do? He says, you're good. Shalom. That's the point what we really need to see. I think we need to see that clearly and differently. We'll look at faith differently. We'll look at grace differently when you see these kinds of things. He has no theology. He's never going to get any. He has no work to bring to the table. All he's got is his belief. His faith. That's it. Naaman is exactly the perfect example. There's a reason why Jesus endorses him as an example of faith and the widow at Zarephath. They're both pagans. They're both Gentiles, unlike the Jews around him in that scene. Who can say, well, we're elect, we've got the temple, we're all circumcised, we're this, we're that, we do this, we do this and that. These two people can say nothing, and the implication is what counts. They have nothing to bring. They have no single point of merit about them at all in their entire relationship to the true God, the God of Israel. It's based on believing that he is who he says he is. You could say, well, now the Israelites knew more. They had more information. They had the law. It was really important. They had all that sort of stuff. Let me ask you a question. If God looks at two pagans, and Jesus endorses this because he uses them as an example of faith, if God and Jesus look at two pagans and the only thing that matters is whose side you're on, who is your God, who do you believe in, who do you trust? If it's good enough for two pagans, why isn't it good enough for an Israelite? I would suggest to you that it is now, if we look at the Jews, and the Jews, of course, are going to trust in Torah works, in their calendar of ritual stuff, and the circumcision, all these things that we know about from the New Testament through Paul. When he gets to talking about grace, he uses Abraham, pre-law, pre-circumcised stuff. He's trying to make the point. Salvation, faith by salvation is faith. There's nothing in it. There's no little sprinkle of merit. There's no personal merit and no performance. It has nothing to do with a right relationship to God. Not even election, because people, all those guys were elect. Well, if you're thinking that election is a synonym for salvation in Old Testament theology, you're wrong. It's easy to prove. It's this thing called the exile. That was Israel's elect. Yeah. Most of the country, most of them go off and worship Baal and other gods, and that's why they had the exile, and why we don't have Baal offering Israelites in heaven. I don't want to beat up on them too bad, because thank God for them. They were the oracles of God. It's too bad that they missed God, but there's still time. So anyways, I hope I haven't kept you guys too long. It was an important message for me to get out, and I pray that this was a blessing to you. And those of you who have not sent in an RSVP for our Christmas party, which is next Saturday, we need to know right away, like today, like tomorrow, ASAP. We need to know how many people are coming. So I've got enough food. That's one of the main things. We need to have enough chairs and tables and enough food. So please RSVP, or reach out to me or Denise through email at info at Grace Believer or finance at Grace Believer, or through Facebook, or call me. Either way, let us know. We're looking forward to a really good time on Saturday. So with that, I'll cut you guys loose. Enjoy the rest of your snow day, and thanks for tuning in. I love you all. See you later. Thanks.